Think your winter is bad? Try surviving it in a mud brick hut with no chimney, no glass windows, and no central heating. Welcome to the cold season in the ancient world, where peasants didn't just brace the elements, they outwitted them. Because when survival was on the line, even the poorest farmers became engineers of warmth. Let's set the scene. It's midwinter in the Roman countryside. The wind howls across the fields, frost bites the earth, and the sun barely rises before sinking again. For the rural poor, those who grew the empire's grain and tended its animals, winter was more than a season. It was a test of everything they had. And often, it came down to a single rule. Whatever you didn't plan for in summer, you'd pay for in frost. Start with shelter. Ancient peasants didn't build mansions. They built low, half-sunken homes of packed earth and stone, often with a thatched or sod roof. These weren't just crude huts, they were heat traps, engineered through centuries of necessity. By digging the floor down into the ground, they used the earth's thermal stability to their advantage. Even a shallow trench could insulate a room and raise temperatures by several degrees. The walls? Usually made of mud mixed with straw or even dung, thick enough to buffer the wind but breathable enough to avoid moisture buildup. Earth homes didn't just hold heat, they held silence, the kind of muffled quiet that pressed against the walls like the cold outside was trying to listen in. Forget open windows, most had no windows at all, just a single doorway, often covered with a heavy cloth or wooden plank. Any small openings were stuffed with straw during winter. These houses weren't built for aesthetics. They were built for containment, keeping every last breath of warmth inside. Light was precious. Air was calculated. Every opening was a risk. Inside, the central fire ruled the room. A simple hearth, dug into the ground or raised on stones, was the only source of heat and light. There was no chimney. Smoke filled the air, seeping through the thatch or escaping slowly through a hole in the roof. It sounds miserable, but that smoke, it helped. It slowed insect infestations, dried the roof from within, and, most importantly, formed a thin layer of insulation beneath the ceiling, creating what modern engineers would call a thermal blanket. Yes, it irritated the lungs, it stung the eyes, it coated everything in soot, but it also kept you alive. Sleeping strategies were clever and communal. Entire families huddled together on raised platforms, often just above the animals. That wasn't poor planning, it was brilliant engineering. Livestock gave off steady body heat, and by sleeping above them, families harvested that warmth. It wasn't luxury, it was survival. Their beds? Crude wooden frames, filled with straw, moss, or old cloth. And they didn't sleep flat on their backs. They slept curled, spooned together for warmth. Body heat was currency, and every inch of closeness mattered. Archaeological evidence shows these sleep platforms were often angled, not flat, promoting airflow while preventing drafts from sweeping across the floor. Blankets? If you were lucky. More often, cloaks doubled as bedding, layered wool if it was available, or even dried grass stuffed into linen sacks. Clothing itself became part of the sleeping system. Wool tunics were rarely washed in winter because washing stripped the natural lanolin that made them water-resistant. Some even rubbed animal fat into outer garments to block wind and moisture. Disgusting? Maybe. Effective? Absolutely. Winter preparations began early. To prepare for winter, ancient families didn't wait until the cold arrived. Preparations began in late summer and early autumn. Firewood was gathered, dried, and stacked under makeshift shelters to prevent rot. Clay pots were repaired or replaced. Roofs were patched with fresh thatch or sod. Even door hinges made from wood or rawhide were tightened and reinforced. The entire home became a machine, tuned for survival. Tools were also checked and sharpened. Blades used for butchering, carving, and chopping had to be in top condition. Axes were polished, sickles honed, and wooden handles reinforced. Even minor tool failure could spell disaster in a world where replacements weren't just bought, they were built. And food, always central to warmth. Peasants didn't count calories, but they understood one thing. To survive the cold, you had to eat heavily. Winter meals were dense, fatty, and repetitive. Think boiled grains, lentils, and root vegetables cooked in thick stews, what the Romans called pulse, sometimes mixed with lard or bits of dried meat. These simmered endlessly over the hearth, providing not just nourishment, but ambient heat and humidity that made the air more breathable. Storage was equally ingenious. Romans didn't have fridges, but they had dolia, massive ceramic jars buried partway in the ground, which kept grains, legumes, and salted foods at stable temperatures. Root vegetables were stored in pits lined with straw and covered with earth, regulating moisture and cold. Entire underground pantries acted like ancient refrigerators, and food was rotated based on how well it kept through the season. It was a system, not a guess. Some families used buried amphora sealed with wax or pitch to preserve fats and oils. Smoked meat hung from the rafters, absorbing heat and smoke from the hearth below. Fermentation, salting, drying, all were ancient sciences, honed not for taste, but survival. Survival was a shared responsibility. Rural villages had communal strategies. In tight-knit communities, fires were monitored collectively. In some regions, families took turns tending communal ovens or guarding the coals at night. If a fire went out in one household, a neighbor's hearth might reignite it. Cooperation wasn't just noble, it was survival. Even the animals played their part. In winter, chickens, pigs, goats, sometimes even cows, were brought inside, not into a barn, into the house. Their breath and body heat raised the internal temperature by several degrees. The smell was terrible. The benefit? Immediate. One cow could warm a space as much as a small fire. Peasants knew it, and they planned their floor plans accordingly. And manure had a use too. Some communities mixed fresh dung with straw to create slow-burning fuel blocks. When dried, they burned slowly and steadily, offering an alternative to scarce firewood. Daily life followed the sun. Tasks were centered around the warmest hours, mid-morning to early afternoon. Work started late and ended early in winter. Villages organized around the solar rhythm, with strict norms. Some communities even fined families who ignored the agreed-upon frost watch, leaving others vulnerable when fires dwindled or temperatures dropped dangerously low. Time was measured by the cold. Without clocks, ancient villagers used natural signs: the length of a shadow, the behavior of birds, or the frost forming on clay pots left outside overnight. If the frost crept too high, it was time to double the firewood or shift sleeping positions. This observational vigilance helped them make real-time decisions that could mean the difference between frostbite and safety. Clothing was insulation, not fashion. Winter clothing wasn't just about layers, it was about logic. The inner layers were softer, closer to the skin, often linen if available. But most wore wool, layered, unwashed, and sometimes stuffed with straw for insulation. Foot coverings were wrapped in cloth, tied with leather straps, and often lined with moss. Moss wasn't just insulation, it had antibacterial properties and absorbed moisture, an accidental discovery that doubled as a medical precaution. On particularly brutal nights, families rotated fire-watching duties. The last to bank the coals was the first to rise and stir the embers. Some villages even had designated frost watchers, checking on elders or newborns and alerting others if the cold became life-threatening. It was not just a home strategy, it was village-wide coordination. Even small rituals mattered. Some households would hang charms or herbal bundles near the hearth, believing they could ward off sickness brought by the cold. Others sang or recited protective chants while sealing up doorways with straw. Whether or not they worked, they helped people feel in control, a psychological warmth that mattered almost as much as the physical. And warmth wasn't just survival, it was power. The knowledge of how to keep a family alive through the dead of winter wasn't written down, it was passed down. Mothers taught daughters how to build a fire with damp kindling. Fathers showed sons where to dig for the driest wood. Every trick, every habit, every scrap of advice was part of an invisible survival manual etched in memory. Ancient peasants knew that heat didn't just come from fire. It came from bodies, from food, from insulation, and from carefully preserved knowledge passed down through